Good morning. Today we want to welcome Mr. Noel Hackerson from Lensbit, a Google developer expert and the National Democratic Institute to join us. And he'll talk to us about product innovation in our privacy by design world. Mr. Hackerson is a Google developers expert for product strategy and a seasoned technical product director delivering vision, camera, web and mobile technologies from abstract concepts to final products. He sits on the alumni leadership board for the leading online education startup, Udacity. And he has a very long list of accomplishments, which I will not bore you on with. We've got too much detail. So, without further ado, please welcome Noel.
Hey, thank you, Larry. First, I want to sort of thank Larry. I want to thank Liz as well for making the connection to me to come all the way here from DC to come speak here. It's an honor, and I hope at the end of the day, at least you sort of take the key takeaways that I'm going to explore in this talk. I also want to thank you for sort of, taking time out of your day to listen to me. So that's very much appreciated. So, as I said, I'm going to be talking about how to rethink building, designing products in a world where, data privacy is top of mind. I'm pretty sure, I guess, by show of hands, how many people here have a Facebook account? I expect like every single person's hand to go up. But are there some people that don't have Facebook accounts here? That's impressive. That's good. Or bad. Or we'll find out here in a second. So we're going to sort of think about privacy by design. It's a concept that was introduced and thanks to Canada for that. And it's being adopted in regulations around the world around how we recognize, the user's data. The EU recently enacted a law that goes into effect on May 25th. I'll get into that briefly. That recognizes your right to your data as a human right, essentially. So as we start peeling the onion as to what that means, you start to realize that giving the rights back to the user means you have to rethink how you build your apps, how you build your software, how you collect information. And so it changes your entire sort of frame of mind as to how you address user data privacy. A little bit about me, about 15 years in product, starting as a software engineer, to a product designer, to a product marketing person. Lately, I've been leading product teams at the National Democratic Institute, which was started by Madeleine Albright in '86, I believe. And I'm responsible for a product line of open source tools that get used by governments and civic organizations around the world that can't afford to pay for Salesforce or an election tool. We open source those solutions, host it, support it for them, because they may want to progress their societies and want to make their citizens better, but they may not have the technical aptitude or the money to host it. So on a day-to-day basis, I'm managing about a dozen different products. And certainly data privacy, as for example, you're conducting an election, you're collecting data from citizens who are voting, is very top of mind. I'm also an independent software developer. I do a lot of machine learning stuff. I do a lot of augmented reality things. And right next to me here is my lovely daughter, Sparrow. And there's a reason why Sparrow is on my slide. Sparrow, very smart. I'm biased, of course. Sparrow goes to school. She's only 3. She goes to pre-K in Alexandria, Virginia. And I entrust her to the care of the people who run the school. I send her there and I say, hey, school, teachers, this is my kid. Teach her, feed her, show her a good time. But at the end of the day, if you want to do something outside of the bounds of that agreement, because I'm the parent, you have to come through me. I have to give consent. So it is through that lens that whenever they want to go out to the zoo or excursions, I have to give consent. I am the parent. That is the agreement. This is how I think about data privacy. It is my data. So when I hand it off to Facebook, I'm going to pick on Facebook a lot today because Mark Zuckerberg was in front of Congress and is going to be in front of the EU pretty soon. So poor Facebook. I love Facebook. I'm on Facebook. It's through that lens that I start thinking about data privacy. It is my data. It is my right. And that zero-sum mentality where I'm giving up my data with the hopes of getting a free service for them to use my data anyhow they want for their fiduciary benefits as a publicly traded company, that is being turned over on its head. So hopefully the key takeaways today, if I do a good job, is to help you understand this sea change in how we think about data privacy and use of data. And then, given that this is a computer informatics and a technical class, I will provide examples and design. I'll start with design guidelines and get into the code. But I should note that this was super technical. But my colleague Alan spoke to you guys last week and said, you know, maybe pare it down back a little bit. But I do have the source code on my GitHub, and so I'll share that with you. So as I said, users' data and the privacy that we as developers, or we as designers, or we as stewards of other people's information, the way we think about that data is changing. There is a growth in data on one side, which introduces vulnerabilities and data breaches. There is a growth in, you know, not just vulnerabilities, but people taking advantage of said data. So think US elections and elections around the world being manipulated based on my private information in order to change elections, which is the gravity of this thing, right? Because if we're not good stewards of other people's data, if we do not give agency to each and every one of our data subjects, which is our users, we could potentially change our way of life because we bring in people in power who perhaps may not share our values. Or maybe they do, but are influenced by foreign adversaries. So on the other side, as a result, people are paying attention. People in power are paying attention. And so globally, there are regulations popping up. So there's a growth there. And of course, for the IT guy who's slaving away trying to, whack-a-mole all these other openings and vulnerabilities that are coming, there's a lens by which you might think, this is just overwhelming. I'm just going to get the lawyers to write policies, and so that might cover me if there is a breach. But that's not how we should think about this. We should look at this and embrace it as an opportunity, rather than a zero-sum, a positive sum. See the positive that comes in by opening up data to our data subjects to allow them to thereby influence where our product goes, the direction of our product. So we're not sacrificing privacy at the expense of these services. So I talked briefly about, I mentioned GDPR, legislation that was being enacted on May 25th. That is actually the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. And yes, it is targeted to protect EU residents. So if you're, specifically if you are a resident of the EU, that means you now have new superpowers. You have the right to access your information. Just request, hey, bank, what information do you have on me? And what justification do you have to use it? That's awesome. You also have the right to be forgotten, or the right to erasure. How many people have heard about the right to be forgotten before? Yeah, that was actually enacted in '96, I believe, and slowly rolled out. But it was not as long-arm of a jurisdiction as it is here. And I say long-arm jurisdiction, which is sort of legal speak, to sort of explain how broad-reaching this GDPR law is. Because though it's for EU residents, if you want to do business with anyone in the EU, you have to comply. And actually, if you're building an app and you want to make money or you want to have some level of success, EU has about 500 million residents, 300, almost 400 in that labor market. So if you're a B2B type of business, you may want to pay attention. And of course, if you violate that as an EU company or as any company, you face up to, what is it, 20 million euros, which is pretty significant, or 4% of your annual revenue. That is basically the death penalty for any startup. I mean, just out the gate, because we are not good stewards of user data. Now, where does that leave us? In the US, there are 49 states with 49 different definitions of data privacy. And in other countries, they have either stricter or looser rules. So with this global standard, and the reason why I'm doubling down on this slide a little bit, I just want to sort of illustrate the gravity of this. Other nations are looking at this, and by de facto, by default, it is a global standard. One of the key tenets in that regulation, or the key requirements, is that you have to gain users' consent. Because I gave you the example of my daughter, right? I have to give authorization before you do something outside of the bounds of what we agreed on. So I'm going to go into sort of what that means for product design, product development, and just product strategy as a whole. Picking on Facebook a little bit, just sort of emphasizes the point that I was making as far as that long-arm jurisdiction point. Facebook is now grappling with fires, or trying to put out fires on so many fronts. But one thing that they're not paying attention to is some of the features that they've released highlight ways to help us identify photos by which someone else took. Say I'm in Louisiana, I'm in Lafayette, someone takes a picture. I hope someone's taking pictures. But let's say I didn't even know one of you and you took a picture of me and I didn't know, you put it on Facebook. I loved this talk on data privacy. It's such a sexy topic. I don't know that you've taken that picture, but Facebook will tag me automatically or notify me. So there's value in facial recognition. I just don't know what else that biometric information is being used for example. So of course, GDPR whipped them into shape, and they're opening that up a little bit. But we'll see where that goes. This was just announced yesterday, so I slapped that in there. So as I said, the demand for data privacy changes how we build. There are three core tenets that I'm actually there are more, but there are three core tenets loosely based on the concept of privacy by design that I'm going to harp on a bit today. It is employ progressive disclosure, which means don't overwhelm yourself and or your user by collecting more information than you really need. Be contextual. Only collect information when you need it. And have a retention policy clearly communicated with your data subjects that after a period, you will be responsible in erasing that data. Next, clearly communicate that justification of storing data. And so, once you've disclosed why you have that information, tell them for how long they're going to be keeping it, give them access, which is the third point, give them agency over that data, meaning give them access to use that data, to export that data, to be extensible, to have that data talk to other systems. And this is sort of a new sort of concept, so we won't dive too much into it. But it's just something to think about when you're thinking about the security of your app, the privacy, data modeling around user privacy, and extensibility of your applications. Because it may not be a standard today, but we have an opportunity, a positive sum opportunity, to sort of lead with some of these features. And at the end of this, at the end of the day, if we comply to some, or we adopt some of these principles, yes, it may be very difficult to, and there'll be a lot of trial and error in how you design these to not disrupt the flow of the actual utility of your application, but you'll gain trust. And that's sort of what drives markets. One element or factor that drives market. So on that, I'm going to sort of pick apart a few of the three points with examples, sometimes code. We'll see where this goes. I can't remember how I set this up. So first, collecting information only when you need it. Can somebody just let me know, let's say you want to build a to-do app, right? What you think the flow or the different stages of that app would be, or the key user journey, if you're familiar with that term. So from the time that they discover your to-do app to the time where they see a report or check off an item is done. Anyone? What's that flow look like? Assuming they need to authenticate at some point. I'm going to start calling on people.
So the process is from the second they download the app to whenever they start using the app, I guess is what you're asking?
So from discovery to the goal, we're using a to-do app, for an example.
So the general process is determining whether they want the app at first. So they decide based on the description or whatnot whether they need the app.
Right.
That process goes into downloading and I guess creating user information to log into the application. Assuming it's not an application that runs without user interface or user profile. Once they have the user profile, I guess they use it for a couple days and then they forget it's there, and now there's data on the internet that just exists. Right.
Actually, that's exactly right, right? You get them in, they discover your site, or someone recommends them to find it on the App Store or on a URL, sent it to you via WhatsApp. You clicked on it. Traditionally, the first thing you see is register, sign up, or log in, right? And then the next stage is to learn about the app or use the app. And then you find utility in it, or you don't, and you forget, oh, I can delete my account. And you're absolutely right. That data just lives on in perpetuity. So I'm going to use an example called PolYMER. It's an app that, at my full-time job, we've gotten a lot of demand for. A lot of our, political organizations around the world want their media monitors, people who traditionally managed the message and managed social media, to understand what was being said and when. They want that audio, that job, that role, to be able to have a pulse on what is being said by their politicians or by the other party, for example. So I'm going to use that as a quick example. So the flow would be a user visits a social media monitoring app, call it POLYMER. As you said, the user is prompted to log in and authenticate to that app. The user searches content, maybe filters it, oh, I want to see everything related to women's rights. So I type in women's rights and I filter it down and I find utility in it. Sometimes with enterprise-y applications, there isn't really that that churn where you forget you use it because it's part of your job if you're a media monitor. So let's pretend as if they have to keep using it, at least if they find utility in it. So they find the analysis they need, they save a report, and then do with it what they want. That's the flow we're all familiar with. But that flow is horrible. So let's just say this is POLYMER. Quickly note that on POLYMER, they basically have the core user journey. We don't require them to log in at all. Right? We give them generic information of popular trends. We give them 3 metrics. Let's say, give them something that they can see value in, as in, with all the posts over time, the popular posts on Twitter today or on Facebook today, give me a chance to sort of compare tweets so I can have maybe a comparative analysis between, you know, women who are talking about gender issues and men who are talking about gender issues, because I have a report to do about gender issues. So give me that right away. But if I want to say, do more granular analysis, I may want to save that information. That's progressive disclosure. I have introduced an intent and I see value in this application. And so I want to save. But then when they click save, you'll notice something new. We send them a modal or to, if it's a single page application, or a different view that, it's a little cut off here, but discloses why we need the different fields that we need, because you're going to want to do this specific job of understanding the comparison about males talking about women's rights and females who are talking about women's rights, for example. And so we would need to email you that report. Password, maybe because you see value in securely storing your password. So we let you know that through tooltips. But note that even if they do enter their information, which is the natural design trend of just allowing them to create an account, they have to adhere to or accept some privacy policy, a promise from me, clearly stating what I'm using your data for, why I'm using that data to serve you, how long I'm going to be keeping that data, and how that creates some sort of impact in that job that needs to be done. So clearly stated, that design pattern is a user wants to know about, and we're going to use a different example here. Let's say we have a campus notes app, right, or an events app. A user registers for that web application because we know that is the industry standard for the design pattern that is common. User searches for an event, and then it's giving a list of events. You can think Facebook events, they do that pretty well. You know, given that search, maybe I know that you're interested in comedy, so I'll show you other comedy shows. That is definitely valuable, just like that first example. However, maybe you don't need to require them to log in initially, right? So for this, I want to throw it back to you. With a campus events app, what do you think the flow should be? I'm going to start calling on people.
So go with the same kind of theory, as in, okay, with the campus event app, well, because you belong to that campus, you're probably just going to download it for free, I suppose. And after downloading it, well, this campus, you probably need authentication anyway. And after you authenticate yourself, I think information will just be free-flowing, but I expect it would be secure. Not all of my information would be needed to run the app. It would just be sort of me getting info from the app, but it shouldn't need too much input from me.
I'm going to challenge that a little bit. Yes, this is a campus, and so students here, grad students and undergrads, are bound by certain protections in the US. FERPA comes to mind. It's a user privacy statute that prevents just anyone to leak student information to anyone. That's almost aligned with what we're talking about. And I may be wrong here, so I'm just challenging plain devil's advocate based on your flow. I will assert that since it is a public event, this app, and maybe I didn't disclose whether these were private events or public events. So assuming it's a public event, or a set of public events happening around campus, that information is already freely available. So you don't require a login. It is only when I may want to sort of say, invite more people to the app, that I seek the consent, not just, or as an app developer, I seek consent of the person who wants to invite more people, and that person also wants to seek consent for the other people that they want to invite to. It's only when you get to the part where you actually start touching users' data that you thereby require some secure authentication. So in healthcare, in education, in government, or even some consumer apps that collect health information, there is a valid reason why you might want to hit them with that roadblock, log in, register. But it's not always the case. You can do that progressively as well. So that was a setup kind of question. So I was actually setting up here, and I found it hilarious that all I wanted to do was log on to Wi-Fi. I took a screenshot of our Wi-Fi guest stuff. It gives me very tough to read, acceptable use policy, which I get the gist of. I'm not going to read it. I probably gave up rights to my daughter, being very bold. It collects my first name, my last name, my email, my phone number, and my service provider. And I'm thinking, I just want to give a presentation. Right? So I'm not going to sort of beat it dead for a second, but you get the point. Another way to look at that very screen that we just looked at is to be very clear. Instead of legalese that you have to scroll through, that you know your people, your users aren't going to read anyway, how about making it a little bit more visual? When you do want to prompt them to log in, think of it as a promise that we're going to be as transparent to you and give as much as we get, or give even more than we get from you, the user or data subject. So in this concept, for PolitiFilter, I keep jumping from concept to concept, but this is an actual project that I'm working on. We have the terms and conditions. They have to read it and accept it. Even if they skim it, they don't read it, they have to consent that I'm okay. I just want to give a presentation, so I need Wi-Fi. I know that I'm not going to be surfing porn or doing something malicious on the network. So I get it. I'm not going to read it. I'm pretty sure it's going to be all right. I'm being realistic here. No one reads terms and conditions. Anybody, I'm happy to be wrong. If you read terms and conditions, definitely stand up and leave. All right, so privacy policy, same thing. You accept, you opt in. But then we're doing something very interesting. For the user, we're giving them agency, right? We're telling them, hey, this is what we collect, your first name, your last name. Perhaps we even go as far as telling you why again. We collected that in the form with that little, we told you in that tooltip, but we just explained that we have this on you. We also probably, this is a social media monitoring, so you're probably going to have followers. We're collecting those people's information. You're probably going to authenticate maybe with your Facebook or Twitter account. So this is the data that you're providing us in order to get the job done. And then finally, we want to improve your experience. So we might want to use Google Analytics, and Google Analytics has cookies. And so that's what we're collecting. This is a positive sum privacy by design approach. Note that if I do not consent, I'm never going to be able to collect cookies. It is not, oh, you ignored it. So, like, what I'm trying to say is, even if I started using the app, by default, I'm not tracking a user. It's only when you say, okay, let's do this, that we kick-start Google Analytics. Note that they should be warned that maybe if you remove social media access, you're not going to be able to track your followers. So that's detrimental to you. But we'll give you the opportunity to do that because maybe you have a different job to be done. And that actually helps me as a product manager or product strategist as a new persona type by which I'm going to have to design for. And if there's demand for my app whereby people aren't needing to connect to a list of other followers to monitor, that is a learning opportunity. So that's actually why it is valuable to give agency to your audience. So I'm looking at WhatsApp, right? Used by over 2 billion people. Can't remember if that stat was daily. But say I want to liberate my data. I want a history of all the chat messages. Naturally, I mean, I would go to the account, maybe? I mean, they're going to have to fix this really quick because May 25th is next, like, it's coming up really quick next month, I think. Right? So I go to account, it shows me privacy, security, change number, delete my account. I don't want to delete my account, that's a little excessive. I just want to know what you have on me, right? Nowhere to be found. You scroll through pages and pages of legalese, and you'll find, oh, you have to email us. Well, that's in clear violation of many laws, including the long-arm jurisdiction hammer that's coming called the GDPR. So if you're paying attention to companies just saying, oh, we're going to be compliant, expect one from WhatsApp. Now, I'm not picking on, I'm a GDE, so I'm a Google Developers Expert for product strategy. So it might seem that I'm just picking on Facebook because, you know, Google Plus was a bomb or bombed in the market, and so I'm like hailing Google. No, I have a lot of problems with Google, and I'm very vocal about it, but you don't know that. They do try. There was a group of engineers at Google they called themselves the Data Liberation Front. And long before all this privacy hoopla, they decided to create extensions for every single app they could find to allow you to download or take out your data. That DLF, the Data Liberation Front's efforts became Google Takeout. So for in your profile, for every account that you have the ability to see what data has on it. My colleague Alan Furstenberg was with you last week. He showed you a demo with the Google Assistant. There's biometric information stored there. It's very difficult to find that with Amazon. Alexa device. I don't think it's in existence. You do not know what data was captured and why. But with Assistant, you have that information, and it freaks us out. With Google Maps, I don't even like to click on that hamburger menu and sort of see my history, because it freaks me out. But I'm actually glad that I know, right? Every now and again, you'll see an article in The Guardian picking on Guardian on purpose because they're arbiters of everything techno-panic and moral panic when it comes to technology. And they go, whoa, look at all this data that Google has on you. This is where to go find it. Well, that's a good thing, right? I'd rather know that it's there than not. So let's take a step back. Let's go back to design and development. So say we are building that to-do app that I started with, for example. At the top here we've broken up the actual utility, the key user journey, the things that we need to understand about our app in order for the user to get the job done, to reach their goal. So hopefully we design and develop something that is easy for them to discover. Google has something called app links that you can, in-app linking, that, or I forget what it's called, but you can actually sort of deep link to certain features in your app and advertise those like it was an actual URL, even if it's a native Android app. So you can innovate here, but you also have to be very transparent as to asking yourself, is our privacy promise very clearly articulated, and is there an option to opt out from tracking, an example that I gave before? So people stumble upon your app, is this information freely available? So you innovate on that. When they do find your app and start using it, that first user experience, are they sort of presented with a consent disclosure about their data? Something we need to think about while they're onboarding. And how are we introducing that? If you look at certain design guidelines that Slack is innovating on, they don't tell you every feature right away. They allow you to discover features and then at that point present you with an option to learn about that feature. They're not collecting all that information at once. They're waiting until you find value in it, and then you can learn about it and use it. Games have been doing this for years, actually, right? So you're playing a game and you stumble upon some part of the game and you'll see, let's say you're playing Candy Crush. I do not play Candy Crush, so I don't know why I'm using this example. But let's just say we have a Tetris or Candy Crush thing where you're just moving blocks or candies from one thing to another. You've never done that action before. You'll see a little slight tooltip that tells you, right? You guys know what I'm talking about there? That's progressive disclosure and consent. Oh, more disclosure. It's like, hey, we knew you were going to learn about this, and this is how to do it. It actually declutters your app and helps you build an app that really matters. How am I doing on time, by the way? Oh, yeah. We're good.
Another 10 minutes.
Huh?
Another 10 minutes.
Yep. So we'll go into use. Of course, they use in the app. We're not overloading them, but we're only collecting information as we need it. We're being contextual in that sense. And then when they do reach their goal, are we very transparent as to giving them agency over their data? As in, hey, you can always go to your profile or your account or your preferences in order to learn about what we've collected. So you can let us know what else you would like to use that for. So this section was going to be like a more detailed code lab, but I extended the beginning to sort of make the argument for user data privacy a little bit longer. So I'll briefly cover what I was going to be talking about here. So we talked about the privacy promise. That little bar at the bottom of the page, if you ever go to premierleague.com, it says, I accept cookies. Some are designed better than others. I know everyone here has been to an EU-hosted site where it says at the very top, very obnoxiously, we collect cookies. I'm like, so what? So there's a snack bar that we use. There's a different design principle where you just have it hidden unless a user starts scrolling and then it pops up. And then there's a clear action to opt in or opt out. We're not going to get into contextual features, but there's a sample code on my GitHub repository. I'll share that at the end of the slide and share. It's hopefully well documented. I was documenting it last night. And last, access to info, so preferences. And we're going to use, you can build this anyhow you want. But because some of these elements are reusable, I took a stab at trying POLYMER.js. So POLYMER is basically a collection, a platform or framework to help you build reusable web components. Anybody heard of POLYMER? POLYMER? Anyone? No? So yes, you'll see how it works. You basically create your own tags in HTML to make it reusable. So whenever you call up, UL Lafayette dash snack bar or tooltip, it's just that tag and whatever you want to. It's kind of like think of it as a div or maybe a span. And then whatever content you have in there is sort of self-contained, and you just basically call that out anyhow you want. And we also want to use sort of modern design practices like progressive web apps. And so this is just me sort of inserting an opinionated view of what a web application is. You may want people to sort of see certain consent features, since this is a reusable component, even if they're offline. If it's a mobile-ready app, that you know that they're not going to be able to get access to that. And so how we build really matters. So the framework that I built in the code repository that you're going to see was built with FIREBASE as sort of the backend and POLYMER. And there's a library called PolyFire, because POLYMER and FIREBASE in order to do that. And you'll see on the bottom left here that we're building this thing called the Louisiana Notes app. I think you're probably stuck with one example instead of jumping like that. But that's fine. You'll notice it's kind of small and hard to see, but when you first visit it, you see that privacy promise snack bar. And by the way, if you're wondering what goes into that text right there, it actually just says, depending on what you're tracking or what you're collecting, I might put, hey, I want to be able to improve your experience on this app, so I'm going to enable Google Analytics and Mixpanel for top of the funnel analytics and bottom of the funnel user behavior tracking, for me to understand how you use this app in order to improve it. And so I'll put that verbosely, or succinctly, but as clearly, not verbosely, because that's the opposite of what I just said, but so as tersely as I can at the bottom there, and give them the right to opt in or opt out to, say, cookies. If they don't click on that and you just keep that, it's annoying enough that you might just want to just click it. I always do that. But that's a dark pattern, so that's an ethical sort of gray area that I don't want to get into. But I leave that there until they actually opt in, so that we can actually use it, because I respect their consent. But they can also just use the notes without logging in. It's public, but it's a session that's pseudonymously, or maybe pseudonymous is wrong there, but anonymously tied to one unique account. If I ever want to save that note, I may want to securely use my ID. Okay? And so that's where the second screen comes in. So, not to jump into the weeds too much, we use a package manager on NPM called Bower. The link is down here. The code is on GitHub. Last slide. We use FIREBASE, same process. It's an NPM library. Set it up as a global. Install that. You're going to need Bower because you're going to be using that package manager for any other libraries that you may want to pull in, assuming it's available on Node.js or on NPM. And then you sort of start declaring your dependencies. In this case, we just care about these are just sort of boilerplate dependencies for FIREBASE. Platinum SW elements is just another web element to just sort of style my app so I don't have to write CSS from scratch. But then I'm importing It's just a styled HTML page that is going to be tied to this FIREBASE app. And at the bottom here, hard to see, is my, as I explained before, it says NA privacy, NA that's privacy, that's snack bar. Any part of my application that I invoke this tag, if I've built the application right, you'll see that little snack bar appear automatically. So to sum up, the principles, those 3 principles can be broken down into be proactive, not reactive. Privacy is always going to be the default setting because at least the EU, they shouldn't be the special ones. We all should have that as our right. Think more positive sum, not zero sum. Gain user confidence by being transparent. Respect your user's privacy. I'm sure that we do that already, but now we have a mandate to do that. Sorry for the icons not making sense right now. I realize that. I missed that. And then ensure end-to-end security, meaning apply whatever security by design practices that you have in order to make sure that if there is a data breach, according to the GDPR, if there's a data breach on a Friday, by Monday, 72 hours later, you better report it if you clearly communicate. So this is a call to arms. What future do you want to build for, right? Do you want to go with the status quo and just have legalese hidden around because we think that we don't really care about those Europeans? We have a niche community that we want to serve. Or do we want to give agency to our users? Do you want to respect consent? So that's pretty much it. And I'll take any questions that you may have. And that's the repo right there. I'll share this. I'll make sure this is shared.
So I have a question. So the key note of this talk was about privacy and consent. Now, with application, obviously you've done it with marketing and development of applications before. Anytime you have free application, the application's revenue is typically driven off of ad revenue or some other system in which there's marketing driven into that application in some manner. How would you deal with a user that denies consent?
Right.
So in a scenario where you're obviously trying to make ad revenue through this application, this user does not want to consent.
Right.
Do you have the right to deny them, or will this be a scenario where it blows up in your face? Because it seems that mainstream media right now is really or not criminalizing, but demonizing the use of data for advertising with Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg. They are getting beat up, rightfully so, because they are giving information without really getting any specific, look, this is what we're doing with your data. But how would you go about handling the crisis of these free applications no longer being able to use data from users for advertising revenue?
The short answer is, if your business model is based on obscuring the reasons why you're advertising to the user, then sure, it's going to blow up in your face.
Right, but I'm saying even if in a scenario where you're being very clear about what you're using the data for.
You're going to definitely have people that are going to opt out. I mean, it's happening to, and knowing that you're going to have people or users that will opt out, new business models will emerge. So look at journalism, online journalism right now. A new business model like what they call it, the gates, the paywalls,
right,
come up, which basically says, I know you don't like ads. You've opted out. We respect that. But you see value enough in the Washington Post. So maybe you'll pay 99 cents to use my app.
So that's what I was going along the lines of, is how willing do you think the vast majority of users are going to be to give up something that they've been using for free with data and pay for it?
This is a very interesting question. I have no idea. But given the trade-off of having agency over my data, perhaps that may introduce me giving back. So there are different businesses that are cropping up along this line and know that there's a blockchain, another buzzword, solution to the question that you're asking, where I basically have agency over my data. Basically, I have a dossier of my health, my banking information, my personal information, my kids' information, my blood type, what have you. And for the universe of applications that want to use my data, it's now flipped on its head. It's essentially saying, hey, pay me, right, to use this outside of that consent that you need. But I need your service, so yes, that's going to be free, but you will pay if you say, take my daughter out on an excursion, right? And so just new business models emerge when realizations of something as dramatic, tectonic as